This is Tornado Talk, a weekly podcast about one of nature's most fascinating phenomenons. Share your tornado story online by email or call us toll-free 800-439-1570. That's 800-439-1570. Now, meteorologist Jennifer Naramore and Dan Holliday, Tornado Talk is on.
It has been 5 years since the deadly tornado outbreak in the South, and our guests today know all too much about it.
On our first episode of Tornado Talk, the author of What Stands in a Storm, Kim Cross.
The power of a story to make people heal and bring maybe some closure to something that was so big, it's really hard to understand what happened and why.
We'll talk with Sabrina Centel, who was in Tuscaloosa when the twister hit on April 27th.
The building we were in was a block on every side from where some kind of damage was. It's just a miracle that nothing happened to us.
Portia Jones found a spot in her home for she and her family to hide. It saved her life.
My family member, he texted and said, "How are y'all?" And we were like, "Well, we're trapped in the house." And they were like, "We're on our way." I'm like, "You can't get to us."
And Andy Green, who says for the rest of his life, there's one memory that will be etched in his mind.
As I recall, I took a picture, I think, and actually posted it on Facebook and wrote something like, "Look at what happened to my town." It was unbelievable. And I'm actually getting a little choked up just talking about it now.
And meteorologist James Spann, who comforted viewers through a nightmare scenario when an outbreak of tornadoes were tearing through Alabama.
We were so busy, I didn't have time to really think about the historical impact of the day or the potential historic impact. We were busy.
Welcome to Tornado Talk, where today we reflect on what happened 5 years ago. And Jen, this is our first episode together. I'm excited to be with you.
Me too.
That day, I can remember it so well. I wasn't on radio anywhere that day in the area that was affected. You, however, were. I was in Kansas City. You were in Atlanta working for the Weather Channel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was broadcasting that afternoon and evening for WRSA in Huntsville, Alabama. But one of the things that day that took us by surprise was the strength of storms that had already formed early in the morning, Dan, on April 27th. There was already widespread damage that had occurred across parts of Mississippi into already central and northern Alabama and southern middle Tennessee. The morning storms actually caused power outages, affecting not only the public, but also several NOAA weather radio all hazards transmitters were down. And this was already during the morning time. And then, of course, the afternoon and evening happened. And there were several damaging tornadoes on the ground at the same time. There were 62 that day just in Alabama. And I remember vividly covering the tornado outbreak through northern Alabama, through Coleman, through Arab, through Huntsville. It was just a crazy afternoon and just a sad afternoon as well. Some of the statistics, and I got this out of a National Weather Service assessment on historic tornadoes. 4-day period from April 25th through the 28th, there were more than 200 tornadoes in 5 southeastern states. The deadliest part of the outbreak was during that afternoon evening time, April 27th, 122 tornadoes, 313 precious souls losing their life across central and northern Mississippi, central and northern Alabama, into eastern Tennessee, southwestern Virginia, and northern Georgia. There were 15 violent tornadoes, either EF4 or EF5, and then 8 had path lengths in excess of 50 miles.
Unbelievable. I can remember the radar screen and what it looked like. And we have our first guest.
Dan, there's one person who has poured through hours of research to learn everything she could about what happened between April 25th and April 27th. She's received awards from the Society of Professional Journalists, Society of American Travel Writers, and the Media Industry Newsletter. You might have read her work in Outside, Southern Living, Bicycling, Runner's World, USA Today, ESPN.com, and she's syndicated at CNN.com. The author of What Stands in a Storm, Kim Cross. Kim, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
We've been focusing in on April 27th because that was the peak day of the tornadoes that came through most of the Deep South, with most of it into the state of Alabama. But it was a 3-day event, and I am currently reading your book, and it's a gripping read. You blend in the weather situation in detail with personal stories of those affected by this outbreak. Now, you're not a meteorologist, correct?
No, I'm not.
Okay. You would not know that by reading your book. You got the weather right, and that is so refreshing because a lot of times folks do not do the research on what was happening. And so you took on a big event here, and you can tell that you did your homework. How did you gather your research to write about this momentous event?
Well, that's a great question, and thank you for noticing that. I wanted really, really badly to get everything right. As you probably know, Chuck Doswell is one of the most renowned scientists covering tornadoes or researching tornadoes in the country, and I read his blog, and he reviews every book written about weather that's out there. And whenever something's wrong, he points it out. And so very early on, I went to Chuck and said, will you help me get the science right? And he had been misquoted or had given 2-hour interviews out of which a soundbite was used so many times that he said, I don't give interviews anymore. But out of the kindness of my heart, I will. I'll email back and forth with you, so that way we at least have a record of what was said. I said, okay, I'll take whatever I can get. And before that, though, I really felt like I needed to start at the very basics. So I went to the library and I checked out children's books on tornadoes, so I could just start at the very basics. And then I worked my way up to meteorology textbooks before I felt confident enough to actually, waste a meteorologist's time with questions that I couldn't answer myself from a book.
Right.
So I tried to do my homework so I could use their time and at least speak some of the language when I went to them. And then I interviewed a lot of people. I talked to James. I talked to Brian Peters, Tim Coleman. I talked to Jim Stetkovich, people at the National Weather Service, really anyone who would talk to me. I wanted a variety of perspectives on the event. And then when it came to writing the science, it's tricky because weather is a hard thing to describe because, as you know, it occurs in 4 dimensions, 3 dimensions plus time. And it's largely invisible unless there is debris or precipitation in it. And I really wanted to do with the weather what John McPhee does so well with geology. He makes geology really come alive for a lay reader by using really interesting metaphors. And he's kind of one of my literary crushes. And so I wanted to do that with meteorology. I just kind of went for it, and then I went back and I asked meteorologists to read it. And Chuck Doswell was so kind because, I think I played to his, he gets really upset when people get the science wrong. And I said, Chuck, I really want to be the first one who really gets it right. And I can't do that without your help or the help of someone like you. And because I know you're going to read this anyway and point out what's wrong after I write it, why don't we do that first?
Right.
So we don't spread any more misinformation. And, he did, and he was a wonderful, candid, blunt reader who, a couple times he said, some of your concepts are seriously flawed. And I normally don't like this kind of flowery writing, but, and I was like, thank you, great, let's fix it. So I think that was really instrumental in getting it right. I asked others as well, but I think Chuck was really my best reader. And I was so afraid of transposing a number or having just a typo that maybe, I didn't think Chuck would be necessarily checking for typos and numbers and that sort of thing. I knew he was going to read for concepts. So I had a fact checker who was trained by National Geographic, and I hired her. It's actually David Quammen, the famous science writer, his personal fact checker. And she's very expensive, so I had to sell my mountain bike to be able to afford her.
Wow.
But she went through, I know, and she taught a lot of things as well. And so I think between the two of them, they really did a fantastic job, and I'm so grateful and could not have done it without their help.
I was on the air that day in Huntsville, Alabama, on WRSA. I was at the Weather Channel at the time, and it rocked my world to be on the air and broadcasting that, and just thinking about everyone who was being affected. And I was reading your book, and you were talking about Coleman, Alabama. Immediately, I'm zoomed back into the booth. I mean, you captured everything so well, and everything just came back to the forefront. But you've written it in such a wonderful way that you weed in the weather, and then you talk about how the personal parts of everyone. And I was reading on your website, you transcribed all of James Spann's television broadcasts from that day. Is that right?
Oh my gosh, it took days and lots of coffee.
Oh,
well,
wow.
I needed to start with a timeline. And I thought that would be a perfect thing because he gets wall-to-wall coverage. There are no commercials. And someone had taken the time to upload that to YouTube in 15-minute increments. And within those 15-minute increments, I made little time markers as the time tickers, tick down. And I wrote down everything he said. And what that gave me was a very accurate sense of the event unfolding and a great sense of what we knew and what we didn't know at any given moment. And it also gave me verbatim dialogue, things that actually came right out of his mouth. And it gave me a sense of what people were looking at any given moment. And I wanted that sense of uncertainty and tension that people really felt that day. So I went in and transcribed everything he said for, pretty much the whole day, everything that was online. And then on top of that, I was able to overlay other timestamp sources. For example, there's a YouTube video of 2 amateur storm chasers who are driving right in the path of the tornado. They don't know it yet, but they virtually drive the whole tornado path through Tuscaloosa. Mm-hmm. And James Spann is actually playing on their radio. His TV broadcast is playing on the radio. So I could actually sync whatever he's saying with the timeline I created when they say something, and I can know exactly where they were when they were saying it based on the timeline of James Spann's video. And then I could weave the two together. And I found that were really compelling because that connected 2 characters who don't meet, but they are intersecting because they're listening to his broadcast in the car and in some cases reacting to it. There are other cases of that with videos that weren't on YouTube that were privately shared with me of other storm chasers. And so this was really, really helpful. There were examples of other YouTube videos that, he was or wasn't in the background for, but that, gave me a great sense of what the sky looked like that day from different angles, what people were seeing, what it sounded like, what the sky looked like before and after, what people were saying. And all of this is notable because these sources didn't really exist 10 years ago. This book couldn't have been written 10 years ago.
Right.
When Sebastian Junger wrote The Perfect Storm, he really only had to go on a little bit of information and some interviews with recollected dialogue. So I had an embarrassment of riches when it came to material.
That is amazing. I mean, that had to take so much time to do, but that is, you did such a wonderful job putting that all together. And I even noticed too that you were grabbing people's Facebook posts and different things like that to capture their emotion during the time when they were huddled in a shelter or, in their hallway or whatever it may be. And they were, putting comments out on Facebook and went through all that as well. That was very impactful. Now, you are a graduate of the University of Alabama.
That's right. I went there as an undergrad and then went off to work and then came back 4 years later as a grad student.
Okay. What led you to go ahead and take on this endeavor? What inspired you to write this book?
Well, really, I was working at Southern Living at the time, and we had to think, what can we say 4 months from now, which is the soonest we could get a story in the magazine. What can we say 4 months from now that is not going to be old news and that people are going to want to read, and that's going to matter? And so I sent my team out of reporters and photographers into, something like 5 or 6 states. And we all reconvened. We saw what was out there. We reconvened, and we said, well, what are some of the common threads here? And my driving question was, how do people cope with tragedy? What are their coping mechanisms? And we found 3 common themes, and they were faith, food, and fellowship. And I thought, that's meaningful because anyone who's ever been through a hurricane or 9/11 or a personal storm can relate to that. And so I wanted readers to have this Me Too moment, oh yeah, I've felt that too. I've been the recipient of of the kindness of strangers. So we wrote this story, and also I should mention that Rick Bragg, the famous Southern author who wrote All Over But the Shoutin' and many, many fantastic books, he was a columnist for the magazine, and I was his editor. He still is a columnist for Southern Living, and he lived in Tuscaloosa. And so I immediately called him as a friend and said, "Are you okay?" And he said, yes, we were not in Tuscaloosa when this happened, but our street's been hit really bad. And then the second question was, can you please write something about it for us? Because this is huge and you're personally affected. And so he and I worked on it together. He really did a lot of coaching because I hadn't worked on a feature really this big in a while, if ever. And what we produced got a lot of letters from readers who said, this made me cry. This is the first time in 30 years of reading Southern Living that I've ever cried while reading the magazine, or this made me proud to be Southern, or me too, I saw this in my own neighborhood. And so those letters really were what inspired me to write the book, because I realized the power of a story the power of a story to make people heal and bring maybe some closure to something that was so big, it's really hard to understand what happened and why. And I thought that there might be some healing in that understanding. And I thought, too, that the nation really needed to know what happened, because this was our Katrina. This was our 9/11. But most of the nation doesn't know about it because the news cycle moved on to the Joplin tornado and Osama bin Laden's assassination.
Right.
So there are large, parts of the population that have no recollection of the biggest tornado outbreak in recorded weather. So I thought that's an important story to tell, and I looked around, and there are great books about hurricanes and nor'easters and other events, but I didn't find one that I thought lived up to that caliber for a tornado. And so I thought, well, this is a great opportunity to, go a little bit into the science and teach a little bit about something that's very misunderstood. There's so many wives' tales and myths out there that need to be busted, but it's also just a compelling story. And to me, it was more, again, than just about the tornado and the weather. It was about how the devastation really created these everyday heroes and these examples of strangers helping strangers and just everyday people doing extraordinary things that were so touching and so meaningful in the wake of the storm. So you mentioned the use of Facebook posts and comments, and this is really important because as an author, it's a real challenge to try to bring a character to life who is no longer with us to be interviewed to the same degree that you can bring a character to life who is around to be interviewed. And these Facebook posts and tweets and social media messages allow you to get in the head of a character who is not with us anymore at a very precise moment. And I think that they're so poignant because I left them unedited, so you can hear their voices and sense their personality in the spellings of the word and the misspellings and the lack of punctuation. Those Facebook posts and the text messages, the text conversations that were shared with some of the families of adult children who died, those were, I think, the most poignant parts of the book because they give voice to the characters that are suddenly able to speak for themselves. And I think that, that took a lot of trust for the families to share that with me. But I think that that's where you'll really get to know them in the book.
Kim, thank you so much for being here. Kim Cross, the author of What Stands in a Storm. Kim, how can we let people know how to get your book?
Oh, well, thank you so much. The book is sold anywhere books are sold. Generally, it's online at the big box stores, but I always encourage people to visit your local bookstore and support them, keep them in business. It's available also as an audiobook and an ebook and at your libraries.
Thank you, Kim, so very much.
What is your tornado tale? If you have a story you'd like to share, call us toll-free 800-439-1570. That's 800-439-1570.
Coming up, meteorologist James Spann, host of the podcast Weather Brains at Spann on Twitter and seen on television in Birmingham. He relives the day on television, April 27th, 2011.
Sabrina Centel was in Tuscaloosa the day the tornado hit, and the pictures of the damage and the destruction, she says, are still fresh in her mind. What were you doing that day?
Well, I had taken my sons to the dentist, and my ex-mother-in-law had called me and said, y'all just come up here. The weather's fixing to get bad. Just come up here to our office. So I went up to Centel Engineering, and we were sitting around there and watching James Spann, who is our meteorologist in the area that everybody kind of watches and listens to when the weather gets bad. And I happened to walk out of the front of the office, which from the front of their office, you can actually see the top of Bryant-Denny Stadium. And I could hear this noise. I didn't know at the time that's what it was, but what they're saying was that it was so big that we could hear it when it was like almost a county away. So we could still kind of hear the wind and stuff, but it was a little different. And so I went in and I told them what I heard, and about that time James Spann said that it was going to hit Bryant-Denny Stadium. And so we went and got in the kitchen area, which the lights flickered, and we heard something, but we had all the doors shut on the outside, so we couldn't really hear. We stepped out, and the only thing we saw at that time was the roof of the high school football stadium across the road had been blown off, but that's all we could see. So we all go back in, and and come back. We decide we're going to try to go home, and this is where my story really starts. When we came across the bridge over McFarland Boulevard, and we looked down toward McFarland and 15th Street. My sons were in 4th grade and 8th grade, and they were in the car with me. And when I looked, I could tell that it was just terrible. And I remember telling them, don't look. I said, I don't know what's down there. Don't look. I remember telling them that and just thinking how lucky we were. And then about a month later, I was driving down McFarland at night, and just the darkness, because all of the electricity in Forest Lake and all those places had not been restored, and when you had to go through there at night, it was just dark. It was, compared to what it is now and even before, it was just eerie, and you just got this feeling that it was almost like it was still there.
Thank you so much, Sabrina, for joining us. Portia Jones was a little too close for comfort that day too, Jen, and so was her husband. As luck would have it, they made it to a place of safety in the nick of time.
I decided to go look out my front window. And I had a pear tree in the front yard, and there was a bird, and it was just kind of bury itself into the tree. And I was like, well, that's different. And but I looked up at the sky, and it had little fingers pointing out of it. And I yelled to my husband. I was and so I yelled. I said, it's turned, it's coming this way. So I took off, and I ran into my bedroom closet, and he didn't believe me. So he took off and ran outside to the backyard to film it, because he felt we were getting a good view of it. And I was screaming, and I was like, we don't have a good view. It's coming straight for us, because I could see it coming. It was moving slow. It like when it's coming straight for you, it looked like it's moving slow. And so he still didn't believe me, and then all of a sudden he yelled that we have debris. And I was like, that's not debris, that's it. And so he ran back into the house, and he ran to the bedroom. About the time he hit the bedroom, it was hitting the house and bursting out the windows and stuff. And he dove into the closet. And then my dog was not in my closet yet, so I was trying to get out and get the dog, and he wouldn't let me. But then the dog, she finally made it her way, and we shut the closet door, and it sounded like just strong wind was hitting the house. And I didn't realize the windows were breaking when he was diving in the closet. So it just sounded like strong wind, and then it just stopped. And I didn't want to open the door, so I went ahead and called 911 and told them, I think we've been hit. And she's like, well, where are you? I said, I'm in the closet with the door shut. I haven't opened it yet. And she's like, well, open up the door and tell me what you see. And I opened the door, and I said, we're trapped in the house. Everything is just about came down. I said, so we're stuck in here. I just remember climbing our way out the house, and it was bright and sunny, like nothing ever happened.
You and your family survived, and then you learned something magical. You didn't have any idea about this.
At the time the tornado hit, I was 3 weeks pregnant and did not know it. And found out exactly a week later that I was expecting, and that was really early. But so my grandmother calls him the tornado baby. He is 4 years old now.
What's his name?
Tough as nails.
What's his name?
His name is D'Angelo. It's like the angel.
Oh, yeah. Well, tell D'Angelo hello. Give him a big hug for us. And we are glad that you and your entire family are all okay. Portia, thank you so much. Andy Green was on his way back into Tuscaloosa. He wasn't there while the tornado hit, but he saw the aftermath. What did it look like?
Yeah, I went to school at the university. I've still got some friends who live there in town. And so as soon as I found out what had happened, I just put a quick word out to some friends saying, look, I'm going to go over and just try and help with relief efforts. I live in Metro Atlanta, and I'm just going to go over and help with relief efforts. If you want to try and get me something to take over to help people, I'll be glad to schlep it over, as I'm going over. And a few people, donated some items to take over, and I got those over to the Red Cross and just dropped them off there at the door one afternoon, because I consider Tuscaloosa a second home. It's,
Was there enough to help at that time, or was it just so overwhelming in terms of devastation that they didn't have enough?
There was no shortage of human labor. There was no shortage of donated goods. I'm sure that they could have always used more, but it wasn't a situation where there were people just standing saying, "Help us, give us anything." There was a lot of resources heading towards Tuscaloosa, as I recall, in the days and weeks after that.
Is there one thing about this that's always going to be in the back of your mind?
Yeah. So, I'm an Alabama fan. I'm an Alabama alum. I marched in the band, and you know how we feel about Auburn. But when I want to say it was Gene Chizik, who was the coach at the time, he brought the football team over, brought the entire football team to Tuscaloosa to help with whatever it was that they could help with. And regardless of how you feel about Auburn and Albany and the rivalry and all that, when you see a bunch of college kids put all that to the side and they show up for a day to help people dig out from all the damage that was done, that's always stuck with me. There's all the talk about the heatedness of the rivalry, but hell, those kids and that football staff, they put everything to the side and came to town and helped citizens and residents of Tuscaloosa dig out from that horror. And that's always stuck with me to this day.
Thank you so much, Andy. It's amazing stories, Jen, from people who they're just never going to forget this day.
No, and that is amazing from Portia with her news. Dan meteorologist James Spann joins us now. You've likely seen him posting at all hours of the day and night on Twitter at Spann. He's also on Facebook. Or you may have watched his coverage on YouTube or in Alabama. But on April 27th, it would become a day that would alter his life and the lives of so many others. What was running through your mind as you were coming to work that day?
We were so busy, I didn't have time to really think about the historical impact of the day or the potential historic impact. We were busy, and I'll be honest with you, the morning round of storms, I didn't expect it to be that bad. 5 people were killed and 250,000 people had no power, and that was almost like somebody punched us in the gut with their fist, and we weren't ready for it. And we had tremendous infrastructure damage. We had a little break in the middle of the day, and instead of really looking at weather data and worrying about that, we were worried about getting cameras back online and reestablishing microwave paths. We were almost like Apollo 13 on the way to the moon. We had so much damage, and a lot of people never knew that. And the engineers and some of the other people in this building were just heroic to get that stuff back online, because the first tornado of the afternoon came through a town called Cullman, and that was one of the cameras that went down that morning. Mm-hmm. And if we don't have a live video stream of a tornado, we know from social science studies that people will not react as strongly. So having that back was very important. So it was a day where I didn't have time to get wrapped up in emotion or, all of that. I was just too busy.
Right. So 62 tornadoes, correct, in the state of Alabama that day. Is that what the statistics are?
Yes, 62 is the number. That's a good number, and I know that is correct. What we really don't know, I think, and I don't know if we can ever quantify this, is the exact death toll, because you kind of get into gray areas when people lose their life, 6 months and a year after the event. Was the death attributable to injuries in the tornado or not? But the number that we worked really hard to achieve, we think the right number is 252, and that's the only number I care about. I know there will be a day to celebrate the people that lived as a result of the weather enterprise. I know that. But I'm still to the point where all I care about are these people that died. These were precious people. It crossed every socioeconomic line. You had college students, infants, children, senior adults, high income, low income. It didn't matter. And you learn who these people are, and it will break your heart. And what we have to do in the weather enterprise is to somehow find out what went wrong that day. The physical science couldn't have been better. The warnings were excellent for all 62 tornadoes. And I've said this before, and I stand by my statement. I think the death toll that day should have been 30, which in itself is a horrible tragedy. 30 people heard the warning. They did the right thing. It was their day. But for 222 of those people, they ought to be listening to this show right now.
Right. Yeah, in fact, that was my question. Why do you think there was so much loss of life that day?
We've learned a lot from social scientists, and I think that's part of our problem. My background is engineering, and meteorology. I've never taken a class in human behavior or talking on TV or social science, and we need those skills. We know a lot of things contributed to the death rate. One is the siren mentality, the notion that people think they're going to hear some magical air raid siren, which is basically World War I technology. I don't know why people are born with that here. I don't understand it. But you won't hear that in your home and in the midst of a raging storm, especially at night when people are asleep. So that was a problem. We did a very poor job of reaching low-income and Hispanic families. A lot of Hispanics don't understand what we were saying, and they couldn't understand the images on television. And we have to do a better job with that. A lot of the low-income families, they can't afford a $30 weather radio. They can't. That's too much money, and we have to do a better job of getting a modern device in their hands that's properly programmed so it's not hard to use. They just turn it on and it works. And that was a problem. And we also know, and this is hard, we have to turn the light on everybody. And we have to look at those of us in the weather enterprise. The false alarm ratio was too high. It was too high. And at the time in my market, I'm in Birmingham, the weather service in Birmingham, the FAR was 80%. Meaning 80% of the tornado warnings are issued, nothing happens. And that leads, as you know, to the cry wolf syndrome.
Right.
And we heard this in verbatims all the time in the studies. I hear tornado warnings all the time and nothing ever happens. And so we're to blame for some of the deaths. There's blame to go around for everybody involved in this whole thing. But I'll say this, that the guys in Birmingham have really worked hard. They've gone back to basic science. And they have cut that sucker in half. The false alarm ratio is well under 40% now. So there are good things that have come out of this, and that's one of them. Mm-hmm. But at the time, the cry wolf syndrome was a big problem.
I was listening to another interview with you, and I agree with you on the tornado warnings and, being a broadcaster and trying to get on the air and tell people what's happening and what have you. Do you think we need to use more severe thunderstorm warnings with tornado tags to them that say a tornado possible type of a deal?
Yeah. Right. Here's the problem. So, we can't, I guess I should say we're all in this together. We can't issue tornado warnings properly for, EF0 and EF1 tornadoes in most cases.
Right.
On occasion you can, but it's like playing whack-a-mole. But by the time you see, you get a report, or by the time you see a signature on radar, whether it's dual pole or traditional velocity or whatever, by the time you see the signature, the tornado's already been down and it's gone. These things last for 30 seconds or a minute. So if you're going to warn for those things, then you're going to have so many warnings that people won't listen. The warning after warning after warning, and that's this false alarm problem. It is total whack-a-mole.
Right.
We're not that good. So I agree. In those cases, you use a severe thunderstorm warning with the clear message that this storm is capable of producing a tornado that might get down for a few minutes, and we're not able to warn you. And I think in our business, we should be able to communicate that very effectively. I've never read a call to action statement on a weather service warning. I just don't use them. I have to talk in the James Spann language, and but I think I can do a better job of communicating that. So in answer to your question, yes, I think we should use more severe thunderstorm warnings in cases where you might have a small spin-up tornado. We have to focus on the ones that are the big ones, the ones that do most of the death and the destruction. And again, the guys in Birmingham have done a very, very good job of that in recent years. And I can't tell you how pleased we are in the broadcast community that they've done such a great job of turning that around.
Right. That's awesome. As you know, I was on the air on radio on WRSA up in Huntsville that day, and there were parts of that day that are still a blur. You get in there and it's all about business, and you're trying to help the communities and get the information out. But there are times that I can actually see myself in the chair, on the air, relaying the data and the radar. And there's a few moments that'll pop in my mind. And you mentioned Coleman. That was one of the moments. I was reporting that the courthouse had been hit and that people were trapped. And that was just such a hard thing to relay to everyone in the Huntsville area. And then at one point, the station was knocked off the air. But before that happened, they had said to me, Jen, we're going to leave you alone and you're going to run the station by yourself. I was in Atlanta. at the Weather Channel, and we have to go to the basement. And so they had to evacuate and go to a safe spot, and I continued to broadcast until they got knocked off the air. Do you have any moments when you think back like this that just kind of stand out more than others of during that day, or is it still kind of just all kind of a blur together?
Well, we do this a lot. This is a very aggressive, severe weather market, and standing out there in front of that green wall for a long time, it's a common thing for us. But obviously, on a day where you've got 62 tornadoes, and most of them are EF3s or higher, there is no book, there is no manual on how to do that right.
Right.
You got multiple tornadoes down that are killing people, and if you focus on one, what do you do? Do you double box it? How do you present that? And again, that's something the social scientists can help us with later. But I did the best I could do, and Jason Simpson, who was in here with me, did the best he could do under the circumstances. I look back on it. I know we could have done better. Obviously, we need to improve greatly with that high loss of life. I think the hardest for me was probably the one that got the attention. And let me just say this, too. I think people that live in rural parts of this country are discriminated against by weather people. They will be on TV if there's a tornado in Birmingham or Tuscaloosa or Huntsville or Atlanta. But the minute it gets out of some of these cities, the TV stations go right back to Freak of the Week or, whatever this garbage is on television. And they refuse to provide tornado warning coverage for rural counties. So what they're telling people, if you live in the city, your life is important. If you don't, your life is not important. And that is absolutely idiotic. And we've got to stop that. It grinds my gears. I am very frustrated. And we don't do that here. But again, on that day, we had a tornado in Cordova, Alabama, which is a small town. At the same time, Tuscaloosa was being hit. And I think I spent too much time on Tuscaloosa where I didn't, spend enough time on Cordova. And I think about that a lot. We had loss of life in both, obviously. But the Tuscaloosa thing was hard. I moved there when I started fifth grade, and it was a time in my life where my father had abandoned me and my mom, and we were broke and didn't know anybody, and my mom had to go back to school, and life was kind of hard, and there were some wonderful people that loved us and encouraged us and helped us. So I've got some emotional attachment there, and having to watch all that was horrible. But I'll say this about that Tuscaloosa tornado. People focus on the minute the tornado was coming through town. For the people that are listening to this, that have an interest in doing weather, it doesn't matter what we say then. It's too late. Well, all that matters is what you said 30 minutes before that and 45 minutes before that. And two of the unsung heroes were John Olshoe and Ben Greer. These guys had a dash cam of that thing in rural Greene County, which is way, way, way before it got up into Tuscaloosa. And that video helped us call a tornado emergency, which I think you've got people walking around today because of their work. But for me, that was the hardest one, was the around 5 o'clock that afternoon.
Right. Is there anything else you'd like to add as we're here at the 5-year anniversary? Yeah,
I really haven't processed it in my mind. I think about it a lot. I don't know if I think about it every day, but I will say this: the next time a day like that happens, I'll be at the cemetery. I've been doing this a long time. I'll probably work 8 or 10 more years. These tend to happen about every 40 years. And one of the things I worry about, every time we have a severe weather threat, people will ask the question, will this be like April 27th, 2011? And of course the right answer is no, but I've stopped answering that. I don't even answer now, because the problem is all it takes is one. If there's one tornado in the entire state, wherever you live, and if that comes down your street, guess what? That's your April 27th. So I don't want people to get hung up in this thing where, it's got to be a day like that where it's really dangerous. Every severe weather threat is dangerous. And one more thing I wanted to mention, too, that we've learned, and I think we did a very poor job of this, is communicating the third part of the readiness equation. The first part's getting the warning. And, it's a weather radio and a smartphone app, a good one, not a crap app, excuse the expression, but a good one that's designed to do that. And then know where you're going. And I think most people know that. Get out of a mobile home.
Right.
Site-built house, small room, lowest floor, near the center, away from windows. But the third part, I did a very poor job of communicating this. Having a kit of stuff, helmets for everybody. Mm-hmm. Everybody. I don't care if you're old, helmets. Every life is precious. Batting helmets, bicycle helmets. And what's so horrifying is that in a situation like April 27th, most people that lost their life, they were lofted. And most people lost their life aloft due to shrapnel wounds to the skull region. And a helmet would have prevented that loss of life. And as you land, you might be 100 yards away. That also helps to prevent injury. So having a helmet on is a big deal. It's a marvelous peer-reviewed bit of research out of UAB in my market here that proves that is the case. And the other thing, it's having a whistle or an air horn. People bled to death in open fields April 27th. First responders couldn't find them. You go into, these neighborhoods, you can't even recognize it to start with. And then some people are, 100 yards away from where they started, and they're injured, they're bleeding to death, and they can't vocalize. But if you had an air horn, you can squeeze that sucker. And the first responders have been trained to listen for that. A lot of times you can't have enough air to force that through a whistle, but those little portable air horns, that's a big deal. And the other thing that we had a lot of this, people had severe injuries to their feet. They started walking. When you're in shock and you're bleeding to death, you just start walking. The people at DCH Regional Medical Center in Tuscaloosa, they said people were walking there from Alberta City. They looked like zombies, but their feet were shredded.
Wow.
They had on socks or they were barefooted. And if you've ever walked over a tornado debris field, you can't do that.
Right.
And so having hard-soled shoes is really a big deal, because that will save permanent injuries to your feet. Some people will never walk again because of that, or they have got to go to some radical means to get around. So those are the things that we're going to work on. So, it's been quiet, and I'm very thankful for that over the last 5 years. But I do think often about those lives that are lost. And I've said this before. I recommend the book that Kim Cross wrote, What Stands in a Storm. She vocalized that whole event very well. It tells about those that lived. It tells about those that died. It tells about the professional meteorologist. If you want to get a feel for that day, read her book. It's great.
James, thank you so much. I appreciate the time, and it is an honor. I was not kidding when I said you're my hero. I'm just a
schmuck down here in the trenches.
No way. No.
But Jennifer, thank you. It's an honor to be on your show, and good luck. I think it's great the fact that people can produce these podcasts now, and the ones about weather. I'll be your first subscriber.
Yay. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay. Have a great day.
All right, you too.
What is your tornado tale? If you have a story you'd like to share, call us toll free 800-439-1570. That's 800-439-1570.
Jen, make a note of it. James Spann, our first subscriber to Tornado Talk.
I love it. Love it.
I think you did admit that you have a mild weather crush on him.
I will admit I do. I have a little crush on James Spann.
Now he's going to be following you everywhere you go.
I don't know if he's going to have enough time, as much time as he spends on Twitter and Facebook.
Oh, that's true. That's true. The saving grace. Jen, next episode, the anniversary of the Greensburg tornado, an EF5 twister that destroyed 95% of the town. I was born and raised in Butler County. That's in south central, southeast Kansas. Whenever we would go to Dodge City, we'd pass through Greensburg. And I remember the infamous water tower that was there, the hand-dug well. So much of that destroyed. We talked to the person responsible for calling the shots that saved a lot of lives that night from the National Weather Service, Mike Umscheid.
Also, we'd love to hear your tornado stories, and we'll share them on Tornado Talk. Call us toll-free at 800-439-1570. That's 800-439-1570. Or just email us at jenanddan@tornadotalk.com.
Do we really have a budget for an 800 line? We've had one episode, and nobody has a budget anymore, and somehow we are paying for all the incoming calls.
I'm not the boss.
We'd love it if you'd become a part of Team Tornado Talk. You can find us on Facebook, and we will all stay in touch together because we want your ideas, we want your suggestions, we want your comments. The feedback is important because we are building this together with you. And Jen, we're going to see you next time for episode 2.
This has been Tornado Talk, powered by thestormreport.com.